All right, hey, what's up, everybody? This is my top recommendations for books for entrepreneurs. Let's get right into it. You don't need to know much about my background other than, I've sold millions of dollars worth of services online, or at least $1 million worth of services, more likely coming up on 2 million pretty shortly. And this is my favorite books. It's pretty simple, so let's get right into it. I'm just going to start in no particular order, and how I'm going to do this, because there's so many books that I have that I could recommend to people, is I'm actually going to explain sort of when I read each one, and if I've read one multiple times, which I've read many of these multiple times, I'll explain why that is, and also with each book, I'm going to explain some of my key takeaways, and hopefully I can keep that routine for each book, and hopefully this is valuable. So these are the book recommendations of a 21-year-old entrepreneur. My book list will continue to grow as I get older and have more experience and more wisdom and read more, but let's just start with these. So I'm going to start with probably one of the first books I actually ever read when it came to business and entrepreneurship. This book is called Who Moved My Cheese, and I don't know if the camera's focusing on it or not. The camera's really far away, so hopefully you could see that. Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. And this book actually, it's an interesting first read. I don't really know why I read it for the first time. I think actually I was just going online and learning, I just literally Googled books for business owners or books for entrepreneurs. And it's effectively just kind of a book of parables about these mice that, kind of go through a maze trying to find cheese. And there's this randomization of where the cheese will be, and the mice have to, adjust their strategy to find the cheese over and over again. And it's basically the idea that, look, in business, there are no guarantees, and no matter how many people try and sell you on the guaranteed path to success, the actual guaranteed path to success is knowing that there are no guarantees and that you have to change trajectory and change strategy in order to really get that outcome. So the cheese kind of represents maybe your goals in business or even your goals in life, or the outcomes that you desire for yourself. And the maze is always changing. The placement of the cheese is always changing. And so you have to change your strategy over and over and over again. It's basically getting you used to that concept before you even get started. So I highly recommend that if you are a perfectionist, or if you are kind of crippled and you're kind of afraid of starting. That book was actually quite helpful in helping me realize, look, I'll never actually have it figured out. And it's a very humbling book. It helps you realize that, frankly, some of the most successful business owners are some of the most humble people, because they understand just how much weight there is to the truth that they'll never fully have this stuff figured out, and they're always going to be adjusting. And it's a really powerful read. It was a cool place for me to start. And again, I'm going in no particular order. I just happened to recommend one of the earlier books that I read when I was 17 or 18. Okay, moving down the list here. This is Dave Ramsey's book, EntreLeadership. And even though I don't necessarily agree with a lot of Dave Ramsey's advice on finance, hopefully that focuses. Again, I can't force the camera to focus. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. So you're gonna have to bear with me. EntreLeadership, the subtitle is 20 Years of Practical Business Wisdom from the Trenches. And I don't necessarily agree with the advice that Dave gives over the radio, I'll be honest. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's the best advice for entrepreneurs or business owners. I do think it's decent advice for typical people. But EntreLeadership is effectively how he grew his organization, in the information product space, selling, debt consolidation, if that's the right word, advice to normal people, right? So how do you actually grow an organization capable of, the tens of millions in dollars of revenue that they generate yearly? And how do you hire? How do you fire? Who do you choose? How do you define your leadership board? How do you handle cultural issues? Things like that. What do humble beginnings really look like? How can you, effectively start and grow? And it's really just a lot of different lessons. The book is kind of capsuled into different principles that you can apply. And I really like that format of, book where it's just kind of chapter 1 is this principle. Here's some stories of the principle. Here's how to apply it. Here's what it's done for us. Here's what it'll look like if you don't apply it. And then moving on to the next principle. And it's just kind of that for the whole book. And I really enjoyed that. I don't even know if I necessarily got all the way to the end of it, but I got a lot out of that book. And I enjoyed learning from what Dave has been able to build. He's had a lot of highs and a lot of lows, just like any entrepreneur has. And in this book, he really goes through a lot of the things that he's experienced. And there's a lot that you can learn from somebody who's been in business as long as he has and has learned as much as he has from, what he calls in his own book, the trenches. And so there's a lot of lessons to learn from that book, and I really enjoyed reading it. I could say one of the practical things that it helped me with is building my team, because it's really easy for me. Honestly, I could do $1 million a year on my own in my business. I don't need a team. I don't need a sales rep. I don't need coaches. I don't need all these fancy things. I don't need people, really. I could literally do $1 million a year profit after tax on my own in my business. But EntreLeadership, among some other books that I'll mention here soon, kind of helped me and humbled me and said, look, you can do that, but if you want to build a real organization, which is really what I'm trying to build, then you have to focus on the hard stuff. And it's really, I laugh when I say it, and I didn't even mean to laugh. That laugh just kind of came out almost subconsciously and naturally, because it was so hard to really figure out the leadership things and the actual in the business issues. And I'm still growing in that area constantly, which actually I'll write another book on my list here. Just so that I reference it later on that topic. Okay, moving forward, easily one of the most influential books, and I can't say it enough. This has fundamentally not just changed the way that I do business, but it's fundamentally changed my life. It literally was one of the pillars that enabled me to become who I am today. And I'm far from perfect. I really am always learning, always growing, and it's a constant pursuit of growing. But this book helped me more than I would say probably any book. And, I really just want to thank the writer of it, Maxwell Maltz. PsychoCybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. Let's see if that'll focus. I think it focused. Okay. PsychoCybernetics essentially is a study into the effect of your beliefs about yourself and how your beliefs actually sort of dominate your thought patterns, which sort of manifest your actions. And I hope that doesn't sound too complex. Essentially, you can imagine the way that you view yourself, and I've heard it said this way, and this is the way that I'll teach it to people, because it's always good to relate complex ideas to things that people understand. So we all know what a thermostat is, right? Like on my wall over here, I've got a thermostat. I've got it set to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So if the sun shines through my windows here and heats up the air in the apartment, my thermostat detects that and takes it from 71 or 72 or 73 degrees, blows cool air and cools it back down. If, we're having a cold night here in Indiana and some cold air blows in from maybe an open window and it lowers it from 70 down to 67 or 68, it'll raise it back up to 70. Of course, at night I have it colder and day I have it warmer, but, that's off topic. Your self-image and the ideas that you hold true about yourself and who you see when you look in the mirror is that thermostat for your life. And PsychoCybernetics talks about, how people sabotage themselves out of success when it doesn't align with their concept of themselves, and how you can actually naturally create the successes that you desire for yourself by sort of slowly over time adjusting the idea you have of yourself and allowing the successes to come naturally as a byproduct of the beliefs you have regarding yourself. So it gives you a lot of very practical exercises. It's a very good introductory book into the concepts of visualization and how to have like a vision board, and how, it's like a kind of a book on law of attraction, but not really, because the law of attraction has been more spiritualized. And I don't really believe there's anything spiritual to law of attraction. I think it's just a very practical thing, and I'll get into that. But PsychoCybernetics basically talks about how the way you view yourself is, the way that you respond to stimulus in your outer world, which is your actions. And your actions actually are, what create habits, and habits create patterns over time, which creates, your life. So it all starts with your beliefs about yourself. And actually another book to supplement this, and I'm skipping two, and I'll go back to them here in a sec. But another book to supplement PsychoCybernetics, if you enjoy PsychoCybernetics, is As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And actually, I had one of my team members actually read this before joining my team, and after he read it, he realized what it meant to work for my company and why he wanted to work with me, which is really cool. And basically, this book is it's written by like a 20th century. Really a poet and a philosopher named James Allen, and he writes about how what you hold close in your heart becomes the reality around you. And I think as a culture, we're so lax in what we let into our heads, and we're so willing to just let any message purvey our thought patterns. We'll let, the mainstream media into our heads. We'll let the negative ideas of even some friends and family into our heads. We'll let anything in. And as a man thinketh, it basically sells you on the concept of guard your heart and guard your mind. And really how to do that. It's a very short book, as you can tell. I mean, it's really, you can read it in a day. But you can probably see, I just have so many notes in this book. I've underlined so much and added so many of my own thoughts. You can tell I've gone through it, many times. And it's one of these books that I come back to. This and PsychoCybernetics, I come back to quite a bit. And if I were to say there's any one field of books that I spend the most time reading, it's books on, the topics of, your mentality. It's self-image. It's the way that you think. And I think a lot of beginner entrepreneurs have a hard time understanding the value of these things because they think they just need the next strategy or the next tool or the next, how do I build a funnel or how do I, sell or all these things. All these things actually emanate out from the way that you view the world. And I don't think people understand that. So once that clicked for me, I realized that that's probably the most important thing I can study, and that's how I've gotten such great results for myself. And to be frank, very subtly inside of our coaching programs and inside of what we do for our clients, we've helped our clients sell, I say 5 million, my team says more like 10 million, but I only want to make claims that I can actually back, right? But yeah, at least 5 million online in coaching and services and agency work and whatnot. And we've helped them do that. And subtly, what we've done for our clients over time is help them implement these ideas into their businesses and their thinking patterns. And I think it's why we have such a competitive advantage over a lot of the other people in the space, is we don't just have a series of videos on how to, what button to click and like follow this script and all this. We actually help people think for themselves. And I think that's probably the most valuable thing that you can do as a coach and as a leader for your own team and for your clients. And that's why I love those books so much. So, man, we have so many more books to go through, and we're 12 minutes in, so I'm going to be here a while. The next book is Rework by Jason Fried and David Heinemeier Hansen. So 37 Signals is the founder of a software company, or that is the name of the software company, and Jason Fried and David Hansen are the founders of it. And they were the ones who made the software called Basecamp. And Basecamp is like this project management tool that, went on to be valuated at multiple hundreds of millions of dollars as a company. And they wrote this book on all the misconceptions of what, the common people will tell you about starting a business. For example, there's one chapter called Good Enough is Fine and Quick Wins. And another one is Go to Sleep, prioritizing your sleep. Another one is throw less at the problem. Another one is launch now. And there's just all kinds of ideas that I honestly wouldn't have heard if it weren't for this book. It's basically just a very forward-thinking book, and marketing is not a department. I loved that chapter because it talked about every part of your business is marketing. It's not a department. It's not like you can just be oh, marketing is this department over here and they run our ads. No, every part of your business is in marketing and sales, because every part of your business is in the business of getting more clients and getting them better results and making them happy so that you get more clients, every department. So there's just a lot of very core ideas that I've found implemented into my business as I've grown as an entrepreneur, and I really recommend it. It's about 300 pages long, but it's a very friendly read. You can see this chapter is called Drug Dealers Get It Right, and it talks about giving free samples of your services so that more people come back. It's just very simple ideas that when you really implement every single idea, it can help you really dominate in your field and in your business. So really good book. I remember reading this earlier on, and I don't know, it's hard to say exactly what this did for me, but I do remember reading it and just having that feeling of wow, this is actually not that complicated. I could definitely start a business and succeed at it. And this was one of the books that I read back when I was this was for those of you who know my timeline. I went through a house fire with my family when I was 17 or 18, And it's when I lost all my photography gear when I was a wedding photographer, and I wanted to start my own business. And for some reason, I didn't see that I could just scale the wedding business. I always thought, I need to actually start a real business, even though that's a broken mentality. I definitely could have scaled the wedding business, but I have no regrets, right? I love what I do. And I read that book, and it kind of helped me open my eyes to, what it looks like to start and grow a business. So that's a really valuable book. And I think the key takeaway I got from that is this concept of like minimum viable. So in the software world, there's two types of softwares. There's softwares that do everything, and they do so much that there's just things that you literally don't need. And then there's softwares that are minimum viable. And it's really easy for software companies to build products that are just everything included. And the way that they compete with their competitors is they just include everything. But the problem with that is that now all of a sudden, because you do everything, you actually do nothing, right? And so minimum viable basically says, okay, what are the outcomes we're trying to deliver for our clients? And what are the minimum viable sort of elements or deliverables needed in order to get a client to that outcome so that we can effectively scale our company without creating unnecessary complexity? And I'd never heard that before until I read Rework, and it was just a fascinating thing to hear, because then I started thinking, well, there's tools that I use that are way too complicated, and I prefer the simple ones as the consumer. And it really opened my eyes up to some basic ideas that have influenced the way that I think in my business and helped me get incredible results for our clients, the people that we help start and grow online consulting businesses. Next book, and this one is a classic. So I think a lot of the a lot of the people who have been running businesses for a long time, or maybe have were around in the 80s or 90s, are probably familiar with 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. And I obviously wasn't around in the 80s or 90s. I was born in 99, so I missed out on his sort of, effect on the business space. But this book has easily been credited, and I'll see if I can get it to focus. There we go. Real quick. It's been credited with a lot of the growth of a lot of major companies. It's a really fascinating book, not about any strategies in business. It's another sort of internal workbook, and it talks about just, the 7 habits of highly effective people. And some key ideas that I learned from this book was the separation from productivity and effectivity. So productiveness, or being productive, is just kind of having a to-do list and then just scratching it off, right? And that's not the actual definition of productive. Productive might actually mean, producing, but it differentiates between the two for the sake of making a point. Productive is to-do list being scratched off. Effective is actually reverse engineering the end that you're trying to create, so that then your list or your to-do list is actually focused on what matters, and so that you can be effective. So I've found that generating, significantly more revenue in my business hasn't meant being more productive. It's meant being more effective, right? And so this book kind of opened me up to that idea. It also opened me up to the idea of private victories and this concept of not needing validation, which, you'd think that's like a base concept. You think that's not something that you would really need. But you start to realize that, especially when you're a beginning entrepreneur or you're just getting started, you realize how valuable approval is from people. And it's so funny how many beginners I see that are just getting started that are like, Trey, how do I deal with my family not approving of my business? Or how do I deal with my spouse or my friends or whatever not thinking that I should? And I'm like, look, honestly, you shouldn't need their approval. You don't write them off entirely, but you write off their opinion, because the matter of fact is, unless they are where you want to be, then you shouldn't be listening to their advice, right? Unless your parents are literally Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, then you shouldn't listen to their input on, how you should handle your money or your business, right? You can take their advice on other things, but not business. So private victories is this idea, that you create more victories yourself, and you actually can just look in the mirror and be happy with who you're seeing, and that will actually enable you to make harder decisions. It's a fascinating read. Another concept is differences between producers and managers, so that you know what role you're playing in your own business or businesses. Just kind of scrolling around. Another one is principles of personal vision, how to develop what vision you want for your business or for your life. Another habit in here is the habit of proactivity. So there's two types of people. I would like to say is there's proactive people, which are people that are kind of ahead of the curve of the issues that might be coming down the pipe, and they're kind of creating a safety net for themselves. So for example, I didn't start a business because I had financial issues, and in part I did, but that wasn't the only reason. I started a business because I never wanted to have financial issues. I saw, what my family went through when we had that house fire. My dad is a business owner, and there was all kinds of stuff going on. So his accountant was stealing money, and then the business was being hard to run because he didn't have any time, because we were doing insurance stuff all the time and moving. We moved 6 times in 4 weeks, and so I just saw what it looked like to have a lot of financial stress, and I was like, I never want to have that. And not even that my dad did anything wrong. There was literally nothing he could have done differently, but I saw what it looked like to struggle and really not really be sure where we're going to land after that process. And I know it's not a super traumatic thing for some people, but it was for me, and it was hard to watch, and I had to break up with my girlfriend, and all these things happened, and I was just like, okay, I need to take control of my life. And reading this concept of proactiveness versus reactiveness helped me, because I think most people live in that reactive state where they're waiting for things to come down the pipe, and they're waiting for reasons to start, or they're like, oh, I don't need to do that, so I'm not going to. And that's how most people live, right? They don't need to start a business. They don't need to, work on their health. They don't need to do these things. But then they wish they would have started a business when they're hit with a $100,000 bill from the IRS. They wish they would have, taken care of their health when now all of a sudden they've got, liver issues. They wish they would have worked on their relationships when they wake up one day and realize that they have no friends and no family and no meaningful connection in their life, right? So it's proactiveness is preventative in nature. And it's not about, I think most people make life about reacting all the time, where you should actually be in a proactive state of constantly preventing unnecessary issues in the future, and being able to think 5, 10, 20 years out ahead and think, all right, how does this actually help me prepare for those things? And that way you can live a more free and more fulfilling life, and be in a greater state of giving versus constantly needing to receive because you always have something broken in your life. So very, very powerful book, and I can't speak highly enough of it. My next book on my list is a book by Jim Rohn. And Jim Rohn, for those of you who don't know, was actually one of Tony Robbins' first mentors. And I really like Tony Robbins' stuff. I love a lot of his books and a lot of his things. I'm sure, I don't know if I have one. Actually, I should have his book here, actually. I'm going to write it down. It's in my bag over there, but I'm going to write it down as I go here. Okay, cool. Wrote that down. So I'll bring that up later. Okay, so Jim Rohn's book called The Seasons of Life. And this is just a beautiful book. It really, to me, is less about any specific things. No, there's actually a lot I learned from this book. It's fun. I was about to say I just like Jim Rohn and that's why I read it, but that's not true at all. I definitely took a lot away from this book. It's another one of these sort of poetic books, very similar to As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. It's just kind of one of these beautiful reads that it just encapsulates what it means to live a good life very well, and very shortly and very briefly. It just talks about, there's different seasons. There's, you can see in the title here, there's 4 seasons. There's summer, fall, winter, and spring. In the fall, you reap your harvest that you planted in the spring. In the summer, you work your harvest to make the most, out of the fall. And in the winter, you wait for a better time to reap, or not to reap, to sow. And life kind of works in that cycle, right? Where no matter where you are right now, there is always a different season coming, and it is your job to be ready for that season and a few steps ahead of the seasons coming down the pipe. So it's a really, really fascinating read for business owners, particularly because everybody knows if they've been in business for more than a year, that you can literally do everything the exact same and change nothing about your business, and even do things better, and your revenue will go down for reasons just unexplained to you. There's just things that you just can't measure. You can know all the KPIs in your business, you can know everything, and something will break or something will change that you don't realize broke or changed until 6 months later, and then you finally catch back up. And so this book is really about that concept of this everlasting cycle of knowing what's coming down the pipe and knowing how to respond and being proactive, kind of like the concept in 7 Habits about being proactive versus being reactive. And then it kind of talks about this concept of like standards. It talks about how like, some people in the spring only plant so much because they only need so much in the fall. And they have this idea like, oh, I only need so much in the fall, so I'm only going to plant so much in the spring because it's a lot of work to plant more in the spring. And I'd rather just enjoy the nice weather. And he kind of calls that out. He says, look, like you can enjoy the same things that you get with spring during the summer. You have to plant because otherwise you're not going to multiply your harvest. And you have no idea what you're missing out on by not planting consistently. And it's this concept which, you find often, in the Bible as well and in scripture about planting seeds and letting those seeds grow and then reaping your harvest down the line. And I think that's just a fascinating subject for entrepreneurs because I think it's really, really, really easy to want short-term wins and to want growth right now and to try all the new shiny things or buy this new influencers program or do whatever. When in reality, it's the same things year on year compounded that slowly cycle faster and faster and faster. And you can rely on that kind of growth. You can't rely on quick, speedy access and quick growth. You have to be consistent year on year. And this is definitely a challenge for me because I like the quick growth stuff. And it's also up to debate what is quick growth or what is slow growth in the new internet economy, right? Like maybe my growth is slow compared to some companies, even though we've grown like 400% year on year every year, right? Like maybe that's slow. I don't know. So there's definitely some questions left up in the air from that book, but I definitely recommend reading it. And I enjoyed it personally. And it's just one of those books that I've recommended to a lot of friends and family just when they are just wanting a reminder of how to live in that state of flow and just letting things come down the pipe very naturally as they stay centered in the day-to-day workload. Another book, and this is one that I actually recommend to like friends of mine or people that are kind of having a hard time letting go of the concept of a 9-to-5 job. This book, 10 Pillars of Wealth by Alex Becker, actually does an incredible job at making a pretty hard to refute case that actually running a business is more secure than having a job. There's this quote that goes around, right? 99% of businesses fail. And that quote pervades so many people's thought patterns and prevents so many people from making decisions. It's incredible how just a little quote like that can influence so many people. Like this concept of like those who can't do teach. Like, I'll be like at like a family reunion or something. I'll be like, oh yeah, we help people we teach them on how to do this. And like, oh, Trey, those who can't do teach. And I'm like, haha, that's really funny, but we actually make a lot of money and help a lot of people while we do it. But whatever, And so it's like there's a lot of little quotes that it just kind of busts. Quotes like those that go around our culture. And it was really helpful for me because I was like, am I crazy? Like, I really don't feel like having a normal job is that secure. Now, granted, I grew up in a fairly entrepreneurial home. I had a dad who was an entrepreneur, a mother who was supportive from the beginning, and they saw these things. But no matter how supportive your family is, it doesn't actually matter if, a bunch of your friends and the culture at large has a hard time understanding why you're trying to do what you're trying to do. So it gave me a lot of ammunition to really understand, why running a business is good. And it's kind of, if I'm completely honest, it's a pretty immature book. Like it starts off by talking about his buddy who has like a porn website. Like literally the first word in the introduction is the word porn. And I was like, that's a little weird, but I kept reading and, there's some really solid points to be made. And Alex Becker's, gone on to found a handful of businesses that have done really well. And I look up to him as like an internet marketer. But he just talks about like, look, there's really only 10 things you have to consider. And he makes this one point, like, if you work a 9-to-5, you're not in control of the variables, right? You may or may not get fired. Something they can downsize. The market could shift. And trying to find a job is actually harder than making a few sales online if you know what it takes to make sales. The idea of working a 9-to-5 is actually just a total lie that's been sold to the American people, and he breaks it down. It's pretty fascinating stuff, and it's hard to refute, and it might sound crazy right now, but I would read the book and see what you think because it was really influential for me. So this is actually a book I have my girlfriend going through. She is actually currently starting her own wedding photography business, which is interesting because that's obviously what I started off with. And I just said, hey, babe, like, you need to read this book because, I think it really helped me get started turning my sort of art into a business. And this book is called Real Artists Don't Starve. I hope it's focusing. I think it just focused. So Real Artists Don't Starve by Jeff Goins, Goins. But anyway, I don't remember necessarily any key takeaways, like key pillar takeaways, but I do remember reading this book, and by the end of it, feeling like, holy cow, like I am completely capable of turning whatever skill or passion or whatever into a profitable business. And like, there's this, like, it helps you understand, like, don't work for free. Like, there's this idea, like, the starving artist always works for free. And like, you know, it's just like, it helps you understand how money works. And I don't necessarily think it's one for my audience, to be honest. Not a lot of you guys are like creative types, but when I was getting started as an entrepreneur, I was a wedding photographer and a graphic designer, which is a very creative thing. And I was just hanging around people who were also broke. I'd go to meetups for photographers. They were all broke. I would join Facebook groups of photographers. They were all broke. So it's interesting how a culture can really define your beliefs. And when I read this book, I was like, I started to look around and look at all these people. I was like, wait a second, like, you guys are all completely broke and you have no direction, and there's no way you're going to actually monetize this, which means you're going to end up having to get a job, which is going to hurt your ability to do this for fun even, and, you know, on and on. So I was like, I have to start a business off of this. So that's when I got into wedding photography. And it was a really valuable book for me to realize, you know, that I could really start a business off of anything, no matter what comes down the pipe in my life, even though now I'm sticking to what I do because I love it and I want to see it through to the end. So now, David Deida, The Way of the Superior Man, another incredible read. This book is definitely particularly for men, if you couldn't already tell from the title. But it talks about it's just so fundamental towards, I almost have to reset my brain so that I can talk about this properly because I'm just coming out of Real Artists Don't Starve. I will start with what I got from this book and what it's helped me with. The Way of the Superior Man is one of these books that helped me in my relationships with women. I think it's interesting that as a man, the way that you interact with women is often the same way that you interact with the world. And I didn't understand that concept until I read this book, but the world kind of represents the feminine. It's kind of chaotic in nature. It's colorful, it's abounding, it's all over the place. The weather cycles, it's just constant circulation. There's always something new. The world is ever changing and you can't really fully tame it. And in the same way, you know, as a business owner, you're operating in that world. You're operating in the world of chaos, and we're kind of pulling order out of that chaos. And so just like as a man, I should, in my masculine nature, as a more masculine man, be creating order out of my relations with women while giving them security in their own ability to, or in their own desire, more like, to express their feminine nature. You know, I am in my business creating order out of an otherwise chaotic marketplace, right? So it's a very fascinating read, and I think there's only a few parts. I think it's like 7 parts or something. Yeah, so it's 8 parts. The first one is called A Man's Way. And it talks about like how all men like want completion. They want to like finish things, and that's not actually a good expectation for life. How to live with an open heart even if it hurts. Living as if your father was dead. Know your real edge and don't fake it. Like, this really helped me because I think I grew up Christian, and I still am a Christian. But there's just some patterns in the church that I really don't like, especially for men. And one of which is just this kind of theme of passivity and this theme of like, oh, well, Jesus was passive and we need to be passive too. And when I started reading this book, I was like, man, like, this is what I needed to hear. I needed to hear that I'm allowed to be kind of ruthless. And I needed to hear that I not only am allowed to be ruthless, but when I heard that, that is my nature. I am a competitive, ruthless person. And it doesn't matter how it affects people. That's the first time I read that and really took that in. The next one is like part 2 is like dealing with women. It talks about like women aren't lying. It's just that words don't mean the same thing to women that they mean to men. And like, you know, women will say, I want to do this, and you'll go and do that, and they'll have a bad time while they're doing it. And it's just because there's no there is no logical linear thought pattern. It is chaos, it is beauty, it is just like nature, and the weather patterns can't be predicted. Your woman is this thing that can be predicted and is chaotic in nature, and it challenges you and kind of makes you uncomfortable and frustrates you sometimes, but then other times it fills you and gives you so much joy, and you wouldn't replace it with anything. And it just talks about how to, as a man, be excited about that and actually be comfortable with that. And I think especially in a culture today where we have such a steep divide in our willingness to accept or deny like gender roles, or we have like feminism, and then we have this red pill movement from men trying to kind of come back against feminism. It's a very healthy read, I think, for a lot of guys. And one of the things that I had a hard time with when I first read it was just the very sexual nature of the book, because for me, especially growing up Christian, again, I was like, oh, this is a lot of stuff about sex. But when you really think about it, when you really boil it down, like male and female relationships at their core, one of the core elements is sex, and people just don't talk about it. And it talks about, like how to understand the sexual nature of women and the sexual nature of men and the differences between those things. These are just things that like nobody told me, and it's a really and like part 4 is like what women really want, and talks about how you should choose a woman who chooses you. And that was really valuable for me, because growing up, I was the kind of guy who would always pursue women. And I started to realize I can't be the one initiating all the time. And it's actually not respecting myself. It's not respecting my masculine nature. It's not respecting my mission in life to be pursuing women constantly. And so I said, I'm just going to step back and let whoever comes to me come to me. And now I have this beautiful relationship with a girl that I'm planning on marrying, and she pursues me as much as I pursue her, if not more, which is what is, in my opinion, needed as a man, because you should be on your mission. You should be out in the world attempting to influence and build and create things for your future family. So The Way of the Superior Man is an incredible read. There's definitely some things in here that I do not agree with, for sure, but very few things. Very, very, very few things. And to get very specific, part 7 is called like body practices, and it talks about like, I don't know, how to like enjoy ejaculation more. I'm like, I don't know about that, Chief. It's a little weird to me, but again, that could just be my background and my nature, having grown up in the church. I'm not sure. Who knows? It could be a positive or negative thing to focus on those topics, but I myself am more focused on giving rather than taking, if that makes sense. All right, so next book, moving on from that subject, and maybe I'll make more videos on that subject in the future, is Eric Rice, The Lean Startup. Lean Startup by Eric Rice. So this book, the subtitle is How Today's Entrepreneurs Use Continuous Innovation to Create Radically Successful Businesses. In a lot of our programs and our material, we encourage our clients to adopt what I call an iterative mindset. Meaning, your job is never done. You're always changing your offer a little bit. You're always changing the way you sell it a little bit. You're always changing your positioning online a little bit. You're shifting things around constantly based on market feedback and based on what is and what isn't working. So just like a no is just data that you should learn from. Maybe you're trying to sell something, you get that no, and that's just data. A yes is also data. You should listen to your sales calls, listen to your consults with clients. Why did they say yes? At what point did they say, oh, yeah, that kind of makes sense? And then they started to lean in your favor. What did you say, and how did that work? And how does that influence your decisions as a business owner? Because if you can really follow those paths of least resistance, you're going to find an incredibly profitable business model sort of at the end of that rainbow, per se, right? So the Lean Startup talks about how to make those iterative decisions as a business owner based on the feedback you're getting from the market. I think it's a very common idea that entrepreneurs are people with ideas, and then they go and they sell the idea. But in reality, you can maybe start with some form of idea, but then the final version of your business is going to be so far from that idea that it's literally unrecognizable from when it started. And it's just little daily shifts between here and there based off of market feedback that create that ultimate empire. So like if you look at Amazon, for example, Amazon follows the Lean Startup model, if you would say. So, I mean, obviously, Jeff isn't going to be like, oh, Eric Rice's book is awesome, and the Lean Startup, everybody should read it. but in their own way, very naturally, being, productive thinkers, Amazon's leadership board and Jeff Bezos, they understand how to create a product that adjusts over time. So you've got Amazon started off as a online bookstore. Keep that in mind, an online bookstore. And now you have products like, Alexa. Like, where did that come from? But then if you look at every single day, every little iterative piece that they added to their pie over time based on market research and feedback, things like, buyer habits and things like, customer support tickets and things like noticing new market need, new search trends on their platform, they're coming out with products to meet what people want. So it's very interesting to me that, entrepreneurs have this idea that it's all about having a good idea, and then like if it's good, it'll work, and if it's not, it won't. And it's so binary. But in reality, there's no binary anything. It's actually very fluid, in that you can start off with this concept, test it against the market, talk to 30 or 40 people, see what they say, what would their feedback be, and then go through a process of market research to arrive at a service that will sell for fact based on market research. And then you can get out there and start selling it. And then based on the feedback you get from clients, continue to adjust it and do it over time. We've taken a very similar approach to the way we help our clients get started, or we help our clients who have already gotten started, justify a higher ticket price or scale by using that market feedback process. So The Lean Startup by Eric Rice is a very, very good book. Moving on, we have the Emyth Revisited. Great book. Hopefully that focused. I don't know if it did. I couldn't tell. But Emyth by Michael E. Gerber. I don't know if that focused. Okay. Gerber being Gerber. And the subtitle is Why Most Small Businesses Don't Work and What to Do About It. Very interesting book. It talks about, how no matter what business you're in, there's sort of this ascension that you'll experience where you'll go from service person to who's actually doing the work yourself. This might be, if you currently run a marketing agency and you are the sole provider of the services in that agency, you are actually just a highly paid contractor, right? You're not actually a business owner. And so a lot of people will come to us at that stage and they're wanting to scale out into consulting, selling their advice or whatnot. And this is where we help them, ascend through this model. So you can actually start to notice a lot of themes in what I've read and the things that we implement for our clients, right? Hopefully that's something worth noting. So yeah, it just talks about how no matter what you're doing, no matter what sort of service-based business you have, which I believe online coaching and courses to be a service-based business. I don't like the idea of courses being a product, by the way. I don't think they are at all. I think they're a service. It talks about the different stages. So you've got technician, you have business owner, and you have entrepreneur. I said that very weird. Entrepreneur. Technician is somebody who's selling the service and running the business and doing the books, and they're doing everything. You are a technician. You're a contractor working for your own company, basically. Business owner is the person that basically knows the vision of the whole thing, knows how to fix different issues, but has people playing all the roles. So he doesn't have to do anything. He just has to ensure that everything is being done and check up on it. And then an entrepreneur is the guy that funds the business owner, or that owns the whole piece, that owns the business owner, right? So this is, for example, like, the investors on Shark Tank would be like entrepreneurs, and then the business owner would be like the people trying to pitch the sharks on investing, right? So you have these different stages, and it talks about how to know which stage you're at and how to actually sort of walk up the ladder. And that's not the only thing it talks about. I mean, honestly, there's a lot more here. It really is. It's just a total classic book. It talks about how the E in the E-myth, by the way, stands for the entrepreneur myth. And it's the myth that, and I'll read it off to you, the myth that most people who start small businesses are entrepreneurs. Or the second definition is the fatal assumption that an individual who understands the technical work of a business can successfully run a business that does that technical work. Really fascinating book, and one that if I ran a business college, I would make everybody read. Next one, and this is a more religious book by nature. This is one that ties more deeply into my worldview. It's basically about how to ask God for blessings. So it's a interesting book called The Prayer of Jabez. And it digs into a series of verses. I believe I'll actually show you the face of it real quick. I believe that focused. It digs into a series of verses in 1 Chronicles. It's actually only 2 verses. 1 Chronicles 4, 9 through 10. And yeah, here's the prayer. The prayer is, "Oh, that you would bless me indeed and enlarge my territory, that your hand would be with me and that you would keep me from evil." It's a fascinating prayer. I mean, it sounds short in and of itself, but when you actually look into it, and for those of you who, aren't religious, there's still a lot to be taken away from this if you simply take the concept of God and apply him to the concept of truth, not to, demean the idea of believing in a living God, but I digress. It's a whole other topic. You can still read this book and get a lot out of it. For those of you who are Christian and struggle with the concept of receiving God's blessing, this is a great read, and one that I've gone through multiple times now. It's interesting to me the amount of men I've met where I ask, "Hey, have you read the Prayer of Jabez?" And they're like, "Yeah, I love it," but nobody talks about it. And it's one of those books that is just kind of, there's that quote, like, success leaves a trail. And this book is one of those books where I've very rarely met a man, particularly a man of faith, who has succeeded financially or in some form of organization or leadership role or whatever that hasn't read that book. So it's a really, really good one. Next book is Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity by David Allen. This is a great book. So if you're looking for extremely practical advice on how to be more productive, this is one of them. It's fascinating. It's not so much about how to get, how to minute by minute have the most increased energy and product. Like, a lot of people mix productivity with having more energy, and it doesn't all do that. It's like you can get a lot done. It's almost like if I could say it this way. In 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, it talks about that concept of, like I said earlier, effectiveness versus productivity. And this book is basically the book on how to be effective. It doesn't just talk about how to have a good to-do list and, how to keep track of your calendar and crap like that. It talks about, like, all right, what do you really want? Why do you want it? And how do you boil down the series of large dominoes you have to knock over to get there? And as well as that, how do you turn those dominoes into key pillars and action items for yourself? And how do you actually set aside the time and prioritize different meaningful things in your life so that you can live an abundantly productive and good life, both in your work and in your personal life, which this book actually makes a point not to separate, which I really, really love that. Very fascinating read. I will be completely honest, this is one of the few books in my library that I haven't actually finished. It's like 350 pages long, and it's literally like I will read it for a half hour and then be like, holy cow, I gotta implement that, and then I'll go implement it, and then I'll forget about the book, and I just keep coming back to it. So it's one of these that I've kind of just like referred back to whenever I feel like I need to get back to that place of, getting things done in my life again and really moving things forward and getting out of that place of like stagnancy. Thick book coming up. This is Principles by Ray Dalio. This is one of the books that you're going to hear a lot of like business owners praise. And it's because, the person who's writing it, first of all, is a literal multi-billionaire, if I'm correct. I mean, I could Google Ray Dalio's net worth real quick just to confirm. I may be wrong. Let me check this real quick. Oh, I gotta turn my Wi-Fi on. Just bear with me. If you've watched this video this far, I don't have to entertain you. You're gonna be here for the rest of it. Ray Dalio net worth. Yeah, $20 billion. So imagine reading a book written by hand by a guy worth $20 billion. It's pretty fascinating stuff. He talks about like life and work principles. It's really that simple. It's just principles and concepts that he's applied to both his life and his work that have enabled him to see so much success. And it's not necessarily that he was like bespoke this beautiful wisdom out of the womb. No, it's literally just like his core principle is, every time I fail, there's a reason why it happened, and I can narrow it down and figure it out and write it on my list of principles so that I don't do it again. And it's literally that simple. It's fascinating to just really go through everything that he's applied. I think this book is like 600 pages long. It's really a pretty incredible read with a lot of great visuals as well. Like, this is like a sort of visual of what an organization looks like. It's not a pyramid like people typically think it is. It's actually more of like a cross-sectional communication with different groups of people with no one specific head, and then the rest of the organization underneath, the cabinet members, versus it being like CEO, then co-CEO, then chairman, then and just like a pyramid. It's more like, all right, you've got these different. So it's really fascinating, and I don't think it's so sad to me that people in our culture write off billionaires as being like these evil, like greedy capitalists, when in reality, once you actually get into entrepreneurship and running a business, you realize how much practical and tangible wisdom you need to possess and work with in your day-to-day life, in business and in life, in order to succeed. And Ray Dalio's Principles is one of those books, and I could make a whole video about Principles, honestly, about his book, but to summarize it, until you read it, you have no idea what you don't know. Hopefully that makes sense. Like, I was reading it and I was like, man, there's so much I have to learn that it's absurd. And I feel like even doing $1 million a year in my business, I feel like I'm such a small fish. And it's one of those books that just makes you feel like there's just so much further to go. But anyway, moving on is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. This is a book that I actually, speaking of Napoleon Hill, I've got another book. I'm going to write it on the list. So this is why I have an active list. Because I knew that I wouldn't have every single one here on this pile. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill is effectively, I would say it kind of plays a similar role that the 10 Pillars of Wealth played for me, in that it basically broke the idea that, wealth is only for, people, the elites or the 1%. And our culture loves to create this divide between the 1% and normal people. And it just says, normal people can't be in the 1% because it's only for the 1%. And it's just so sad that we create such a stark divide, and we work so hard to do it. And it's incredible to me that so many people go throughout their lives not realizing that wealth is just simply a pursuit of adding value to others. And this book summarizes it in a phenomenal way. It's a little overly spiritualized, in my opinion, and I think, the Napoleon Hill fanboys are going to come after me for this one. But there's some stuff that Napoleon Hill does that I'm just like, it's like he's kind of really far up his own butt, and like he thinks he's Jesus. But he makes some really good points, and I really appreciate his thinking process. And there's another book that I recommend from him. It's funny that I make fun of him, and then immediately I've got another book. Should I go grab it? No, I will just talk about it. Another Napoleon Hill book is called Outwitting the Devil, and I have it on my bookshelf, but for the sake of the presentation of this video, I'm just going to speak about it. So Think and Grow Rich is basically, once you decide that you want to get rich, and once you decide that you are going to be worth X amount of money, it's fascinating how the path actually makes itself quite clear to you if you let go and just listen to the lessons that you're learning from other people or from your own experience. And it's not actually that hard to make money. Making money can just be a side effect of your living existence. And these concepts I'd never heard that before. I'd never heard that. Like, I always thought making money means you have to do all this hard stuff and you have to like take a lot of risk. And there's some truth to that, obviously. But if you are the right person who is worthy of the sort of monetary desires that you have in your life, then making that sort of money will be just a side effect and a byproduct of the person you've become. So it's not actually you who will achieve your goals. It is some version of you have to become. And that's kind of, I believe I heard that concept from that book, and that really stuck with me. So there's this idea like, oh, you can do anything. It's not true. You can't do anything, but you can grow into the kind of person who can do anything. So you can be anybody, and anybody can do anything, right? So you need to identify the traits you need to develop in order to get the results that you want to get as a byproduct of who you are, versus just working right now to do it, right? It's very fascinating stuff. Next book, and we're coming up on the end of the list here besides the few that I've written down. Actually, before I do this one, Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. I almost forgot. Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill, by far one of my favorite reads. It's effectively like there's some things that I don't agree with. Again, Napoleon Hill, there's some things I don't agree with. He says like that effectively the purpose of being alive is to pursue being happy. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't necessarily agree that happy is something that we can actually, A, measure, or B, tell our entire culture to be pursuing blindly. It sounds nice and it sounds all giddy and hippie, but then when you actually look at what happens to people when we tell them to pursue being happy, it's not good. But anyway, I personally think that as opposed to pursuing happiness, we should pursue joy. And joy is more measurable. It kind of assumes a certain few things are set up in your life, like a good structure financially, a good structure familially, a good structure spiritually. Joy comes from solidity in all areas in your life. And I think that that's a more beneficial pursuit, or maybe even pursuing truth. But anyway, Think and Grow Rich is good. Outwitting the Devil is amazing. It talks about how basically the lies that, the devil tries to sneak into you through culture that prevent you from becoming who you want to become. And it talks about fear of judgment and fear of man. And it talks about not managing your health and your body, and just how our culture kind of celebrates getting drunk and doing drugs and all these things. It talks about all these ways where the devil can get a foothold on you and control you from being the ultimate version of you. And it's a fascinating read, and it's actually written from the perspective of a conversation between Napoleon Hill and the devil himself. And it wasn't released until a handful of years after Napoleon Hill's death. I believe it's because it was so controversial at the time that it was written, that it was actually, I think it was his wife that decided to publish it after he had already died, because she said, you know what, it's controversial, sure, but he's dead, so he's not actually going to reap any of the consequences, which I think is pretty cool. Next book, and this is again one of the really, really, really early reads, probably actually before I read Who Moved My Cheese, which again is one of my first business books, Intentional Living by John Maxwell. This is a great book. This is the kind of book that you should recommend to friends or family that you feel are kind of just stagnant in life. They're just not really doing much. And that was me. Though I enjoyed producing things, I didn't enjoy producing things that actually helped other people or helped my family or my future family or myself financially, or, they didn't actually add any value to the world. Really, they just were kind of fun. I liked making Minecraft modifications by learning how to code Java and add things to the game. I liked doing stuff, but none of it actually was valuable to the rest of the world. And I always thought, that doesn't matter, because it's all about what I value. And again, it's that concept of everybody just pursue happiness. But that's a whole other video, right? So Intentional Living talks about how to write your own story of your life by actually aiding in the lives of other people. And it talks about the value of, how to build a good story and how to tell your story and how to influence, and what it means to actually live a full life, and why most people never step into the ideal life that has been designed for them, and how you can actually begin that process. It's a fascinating read for people who are like myself at that stage, who are in that place of stagnancy and sort of sleepwalking through life without much meaning. Really good book for people in that stage. And John Maxwell in general has some really great books, and I've got more that I could recommend of his for sure. Last book, physical. Not last book, period. The last physical book, on my actual list here on the counter, is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Yeah, right. I got that author right. Just making sure. This is a classic. If you haven't heard of this book, you should have by now. I bet you it's in literally every single entrepreneur best books I recommend video, because it's just one of those that you have to read. It's basically, the title of the book explains itself, but it's not necessarily by manipulating anybody. It's not by any tactic or body language thing. It just basically helps you understand that if you want to make more friends or have more influence, you can gain more influence and make more friends by being interested in other people than you can make by getting others to be interested in you. And so it just talks about basically how people are extremely interesting, and how until you realize the infinite knowledge and wisdom and love and joy and impact that you can get by just being interested in other people, you'll never really wake up from your own selfish desires. And not only that, but it also talks about, how to be interested in people and how to ask good questions that help you learn things. And one of those chapters is how to criticize and not be hated for it. Another chapter is like, if you're wrong, admit it. Another chapter is called how to make people like you instantly. Another one is called a simple way to make a good first impression. Another chapter is called when nothing else works, try this. There's a lot of very practical advice on dealing with people. And I used to think, okay, I don't need people. Like, I can just run a business and not need people. I can just set up a funnel and just make money. It's whatever. I don't need people. That was so short-sighted and immature of me to think that way, because now that I've grown and I'm actually running a real business that deals with a lot of people, we've got over 100 active clients. We've worked with like 600 total. I've got people on my team. I've got people I talk to all day. It's people all day, every day for me. I am really in the business of people. Like, at this point, it is one of the greatest skill sets I can develop, is being able to be and deal with people, and not just deal with meaning like how to just get the least out of, put the least out and get the most back. It's more like how to actually be someone worth being around. It's a very fascinating book. Okay, so moving on to the last books. This is one I actually read recently called Traction, and let me turn on my Wi-Fi again. And this is one of those books where if you're already doing a significant amount of revenue in your business and you're ready to scale, this is one of those books that can really help you do it. Let me pull up my library and make sure I get the name and author correct here. It's really taking a sec. Okay, let me just Google it. Traction, get a grip on your business. There we go, there it is. Again, if you've listened this far, your odds are you're going to end the video, so I'm not going to try and entertain you. I'm not your entertainer. Traction, Get a Grip on Your Business by Gino Wickman. Ginowickman. It's got like orange text on the front, and the big bold word says Traction. And basically it talks about how every element in your business should be able to be measured. Often people lose traction, meaning they lose the ability to grow their business because they're not measuring it properly. And they're not actually applying numbers to their problems. They're just making everything emotional. And that's kind of the core theme of the book that I've found. And it talks about how to assign things a number, how to actually measure your business in terms of KPIs. And it talks about how to build like basically a spreadsheet where you can measure the health of your business based on long-term projections, short-term projections, the KPIs you guys rely on, and things like that. So it was a very fascinating read. I read it while I was on the road, heading to Wyoming with my girlfriend, and on the way back I drove like 30 hours total, so it was, or actually like more like 40 hours total. It was a really good listen. I really enjoyed it, and it definitely helped me with a lot of the very practicals of like, okay, how do I take my business from like $1 million a year to like 10 million a year? Like, how do I do that? And it talks about how to deal with people and when to hire, and just the extreme, I'd say, high level, quote unquote, practicals of scaling your business. But for some people it's also very low level. It depends on your level of thinking, right? I would say for me it was right where I needed it. It wasn't high level, wasn't low level. It was just kind of right what I needed at the time. And I would be applying a lot of the stuff that I learned from that book to my business, and also making a lot of my company leaders read it as I scale, when I decide to do so. Okay, so another book that I wanted to recommend is Winning by Tim Grover. This is a hugely valuable book. I actually had my girlfriend read it, and I've had a lot of people read it. Winning by Tim Grover. So Tim Grover was actually the coach that helped Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. And I don't know if maybe LeBron James, I'm not sure. But a lot of these major athletes in the NBA or the NFL, he was like their go-to coach. And he just talks about like the headspace you need to be in order to win. And it's funny, our culture is so obsessed with like being fair, and like if you win, somebody else loses, and you gotta consider that. And he's just like, look, like, if we're very honest with ourselves, we all want to win. We all want to succeed. We all want to become everything we can become, not just in business, not just in whatever. If you are a mom, you want to be the best mom you can be to your kids. If you are a counselor, you want to get your clients great results, and you want them to be happy people. Like, you want to win. And it talks about, the subtitle is The Unforgiving Race to Greatness. And it's just like, it helps kind of prime you to be ready for the sorts of incredible resistance you're gonna face when you're really pursuing success. It talks about like the rejection you're gonna get from other people, which I've experienced. It talks about being completely misunderstood and kind of written off by other people. And it talks about how even some of your friends will try and tear you down. It just gets you ready for these things. It's not necessarily saying, hey, you should expect these things, and by anticipating these things, you'll kind of naturally create them, right? So you don't want to expect them, and because you expect them to happen, you end up creating this resistance. But the reality is that when you're in that pursuit of greatness, and when you're in that pursuit of success, and my camera looks a little off, it's a little dark. I don't know, whatever. I'm just gonna finish the video. You're gonna face resistance, and Winning is one of these books that helps prime you sort of in your soul and in your head for a relentless pursuit of the things that you've been called to as a person. Incredible read. I don't even know how many books that was. Some of you may have just skipped to the end of the video just to see how I wrap this thing up, because this is probably one of the longest videos I've ever put out. And to completely level with you, you should watch the whole video and actually pick up the books that I recommended and watch or listen to them or read them and take some notes and apply their concepts. But those are some of my favorite books. I mean, if this doesn't convince you that I'm a huge reader, I really don't know what will. And I believe that, it's our job to constantly be filling our heads with new information. And what's interesting too is not only have I read a lot of books, I've invested a ton of money into coaches and help. Not just have I read books, I've actually gotten specific advice for my situation. So a book can only go so far, right? It can tell you the general idea, but the reality is this book has been written for millions of people to also digest the same information and not get specialized help. That's why I've also spent $150,000 on my own self-education. And that's why we do what we do at my company. We actually help people start and grow online consulting and coaching businesses off of their already given expertise. So if you've already sold a couple copies of a course or a coaching program, or you're an agency owner, or you want to be one of these things, you want to get started, there's a lot of cash involved in that business model, and you want to secure a solid business for yourself, the best thing I can do for you at this point, and honestly, I do know that this is the best thing I can do, is to ask you and to call you to book a call down below, because, even if you don't move forward with us, it's still going to be some of the best time you've spent on your business or your wannabe business to date. We've worked with over 500 clients. We've helped 5 or 6 people, and 6 people at this point scale to $1 million a year. And that number changes every so often because, some people go to $1 million and go down, some people get to $1 million and go further or whatever. But we've gotten them to $1 million a year, and we've gotten a ton of people to 6 figures a year in sales. And obviously there's no pressure for you to make a decision on the call. If you want more information, you can check out our full free training, links in the description. It's about 40 minutes long. It's less long than this video, and by the end of it, you're gonna know how to successfully start and grow your own business in that industry, okay? And it's how I've generated my money. It's how I've helped other people generate theirs, and you can look at tons of results that we've gotten from clients by checking out the interviews here on our YouTube channel. So with all of that said, if you watched this whole video, huge congratulations. That was a lot to put down, I'm sure. But hopefully this was a valuable one, and hopefully you got some book recommendations that you'll be checking out moving forward. Once again, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and as always, I will see you in the next one.